Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and today we're continuing the top 100 board games of all time, numbers 50 through 41, 2022 edition. All these games are rated 9s, which means they are excellent games, and I always want to play them. With that being said, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for your continuous support. Could not be here without you. So we're in that upper half of the games here, and they only get better. With that being said, let's get started the list with number 50. My number 50 goes to Ankh Gods of Egypt. The Egyptian people are shifting from polytheism to monotheism, and you are going to be fighting to become the one true god. You're going to do this through fighting combats, constructing monuments towards yourselves, and powering yourselves up to impress all of the people of Egypt and become that monotheistic god. There's a lot of things I really like about this game, and the first thing is the action system. On your turn, you can take up to 2 actions, but your first action has to be higher on this action track. If I were to do this move action, which is on the top here, I can access any of the 3 below. But if I really want to do this bottom upgrade my abilities action, I'm done for the turn since it's at the bottom of the track. In addition, if you're the person to push this action all the way to the far right, you trigger one of the events here at the bottom, which is going to interrupt and end your turn. So do you maximize the amount of actions you get on your turn, or do you ensure that you snag an event or prevent somebody else from doing so? There's some great tension here with this very simplified action system. In addition, I love how this shifts you into the combat phase. If you're the person who triggers the event that goes into combat, you get a tiebreaker token that you use throughout. But you're going to be playing this really interesting card combat system where every time you're in a fight, you'll get to play 1 card. So it could benefit you to be in a couple of fights and save your cards for these big battles, or you could really want to be spread out in a lot of different fights so that you can play cards, and some of these cards may allow you to recall cards. And so trying to prioritize and think about when these combat cards will be best used is another really fascinating aspect of the game. And the last thing I really like is the scoring itself. Every time you have combat in a region, you are going to score that region not only based on if you won the battle, but also your control on the monuments. And that ties back into those events because some of those events are going to allow you to control monuments. And in the battle itself, you can erect new monuments. There's so many cool choices here, and the scoring in this game makes it feel like it's a very different style of area control game, and one that I really, really enjoy. The thematic integration is wonderful. I love the combat. I love the miniatures. I love the production. I love that this scales incredibly well from all the way from 2 to 5 players. And lastly, the scenario system in the game means that you're going to have a completely different setup and new challenges to play the game, and the expansions are top-notch, adding new characters, new guardians, new ways to play, as well as completely new scenarios in the form of pharaohs, which actually have characters that are going to influence the people around. There's so much to love in Ankh Gods of Egypt, and it's one that we're going to be coming back to a lot. Always want to play this one. That is Ankh Gods of Egypt, my number 50. My number 49 goes to Ginkgopolis, a game where you play as city planners doing your best to control areas in this large central city through the use of clever card drafting and engine building. The game flow is really straightforward. On your turn, everyone is going to be drafting 1 card, and then starting with the first player, you'll flip that card and then resolve it. There's many different things that can happen, and the first thing is you can build outward. If you have one of these letter cards, you'll place a tile out, and it'll increase the size of the city and the size of the areas. You can also build up, which means you're playing a card that has a matching tile number, and you get to place resources on this new area. This is really cool and satisfying because every time you play over a tile, that card is now going to become part of your engine. You can no longer access the tile, so naturally it needs to be removed from the deck, so it has some form of special ability or scoring that's going to be available for you because you've built over it. But have no fear, that card will get replaced at the end of the round because when the deck gets reshuffled, each new tile that's been placed has a matching card that gets shuffled into the deck, and based on the number is going to affect that ability. This is such a cool concept, and I love the way this ties into all aspects of the game. The area control, the engine building, and it just permeates the entire experience. My favorite part about this game actually is the drafting itself. I love that these cards are going to be passed around the table, and I just love how smooth the gameplay is. You can take a card knowing that potentially in a couple of turns, that card that you passed is going to show up, and you also have that forethought of saying, okay, I know that the opponent is going to get these 3 cards plus something else, so you can do some really important prior planning based on the different things that are going to show up. I love this forethought. I love the streamlined nature of the game, and I love how simple it is to get going and how smooth the card play is. And I also really enjoy the engine building from turn 1 by building up these different powers through the use of matching symbols or trying to get that endgame scoring towards towards the end. This game is so smooth, and I love playing it, an absolute joy. Wonderful drafting game. This is Ginkgopolis, my number 49. My number 48 goes to Dune Imperium. 43 last year. This is a worker placement deck building game where you play as a house of the Dune universe. With that house, you're going to do your best to win large combats in a race to 10 points. You're also going to be recruiting characters from near and far and bolstering the abilities in your deck. Now, my favorite part about this game, there's two big things I really like. And the first one here is the deck building itself. I really love how each of these cards is multi-use. On your turn, you're actually going to be playing a card either for its function on this white bordered area, and when you do, you can visit, using one of your workers, a space on the board. You'll visit that space and trigger the effect in the white area. However, you also have what's called a pass turn, and every card that's left in your hand, you'll get the blue effect on the bottom here. This can come in the form of things that increase your combat value, allow you to purchase more cards for your deck, or really interesting actions that could potentially generate victory points, all the way to gaining you more spice. There's a lot of cool things here. The expansion adds even more of these icons, and I cannot wait until that delivers so we can dive into even more potential strategies with those passing turns. The last thing I really like about this game is the combat system. Every round there's going to be a conflict that's happening, and that takes place in this large area in the middle here. There's these two crossed swords, and you're going to be putting warriors and cubes and all sorts of things in there to try to bolster your strength. In addition, when you pass, any swords in your hand add to that strength value. Whoever has the most, just there's a clear winner, they receive whatever the award is in first place. For example, this person here gets 2 points and control of the location. Very powerful because it's a race to 10 points, right? The other thing, though, is anybody who's in second will get second, third, so on and so forth. Now, the greatest part about this is how straightforward it is, but also how you are trying to push your luck to try to win these rewards by putting as little as possible into the conflict area. If you can win something by putting in a single cube, that is such a satisfying feeling. Or when you can win that high stakes battle by holding a bunch of things in your hand and committing a little up front, it just is super gratifying. I love how straightforward this combat system is, but the huge implications that come from it. Dune Imperium is a surprisingly thematic deck building game that blends worker placement well and really solves a lot of the problems that I have with deck builders of taking a huge amount of time on your turn, as opposed to this game where everyone draws their hand at the same time and that they're only playing a single card at a time to interact with the board, which keeps everyone engaged and keeps the pace extremely smooth. I love Dune Imperium, and I think it is the best combination of worker placement deck building. My number 48, Dune Imperium. My number 47 goes to Great Western Trail. Number 18 last year, this features a huge combination of mechanisms, deck building, rondel systems, but the main idea here is you are a cowboy, and you're going to do your best to gather all sorts of cows and ship off a variety of them all over the Southwest. You'll do this through visiting action spaces on your way. Every time you visit a space, if it's yours or neutral, you can use the ability of that space. If it's somebody else's, though, it's just going to get in your way or give you a minor action. Now, my favorite parts about this game have to be the actual buildings themselves and the actions that come from it. The huge mechanic of this game is a rondel. You're going to be visiting these spaces again and again and again, getting to Kansas City and restarting that trail, but every time you do this, you are going to be building more spots through the build action. The more carpenters you get, the better buildings you can create, and these buildings have effects that potentially can chain into one another, but it's also important the placement of these because some represent toll booths that other players will have to pay you, or you could put some that have just incredible one-time effects that you're going to want to consistently use. There's also some spots that are printed on the board that are harder to get to that you may have to pay a little extra, but have amazing effects that are attached. I love the different choices here that are present, especially with all of the different buildings. These buildings also enable you to build your engine in specific ways. Some may require specific people you've hired, maybe new engineers or cowboys, so that might guide you down that path, or some may require you to have specific types of cows, so maybe you'll be recruiting a bunch of these yellow cows into your deck when otherwise you may not have. There's a lot of great choices here with this system, and I love how satisfying the turn flow is. On your turn you move, you activate the building, and then you draw back up to your hand size. You're going to be taking all sorts of actions in your pursuit to curate the perfect hand as you make your way to Kansas City to try to sell a huge variety of cows. Great Western Trail has smooth gameplay and a wonderful theme that's going to keep you coming back for more. So that's my number 47, Great Western Trail. My number 46 goes to Project Elite, number 67 last year. This real-time experience has you playing as these giant mercenaries, doing your best to eliminate aliens while trying to succeed in some form of mission. The game flow is really straightforward. You'll have these setup turns where you populate the board with some aliens and then understand what the mission at hand is, and then you jump straight into the real-time phase, which is my favorite part of the game. On your turn, everyone goes all at the same time. There are no turns. You have 2 minutes. Go, go, go. You roll the dice, and you have all sorts of symbols that exist here. Now, first off, these blue dice are your action dice. You'll have a certain amount of them, and when you roll them, you can use them for different things as much as you want at your own pace. The more you roll, the more chance you have of activating more things. If you get this arrow, you get to move. If you use this gun, you can shoot. If you have this wrench here, you can use that to activate different abilities or items or things on the board. There's so many different things that you can allocate these dice for, but you are going to be looking for specific symbols, and those symbols are going to be different based on the scenario you pick. Now, the last dice face that you can see is this red one here, and whenever you use this symbol, you have to use it. And this symbol here is the move an enemy symbol. This is how the aliens work, and it's going to interrupt the flow of your turn because now you got to deal with moving one of the creatures. There'll be this large map in front of you that you're going to have these arrows that dictate the way that the aliens move. Every time you get that red thing, you gotta move it, and I love this here. This simulates the aliens moving and dodging because you may be frantically trying to roll your dice as quick as possible and move something right out of range from somebody's weapon, and this is so well done. It's so thematic without even trying to be. Another thing I really love are the variety in the different bosses. A lot of these bosses will be huge tanks, but generally will reward you with some really cool alien gear when you take them out, but offer their own unique puzzle to do so. The expansions to this game are also insanely good, with one playing you in these giant exosuits that you have maybe these amazing abilities, but can potentially malfunction. And you also have these really interesting maps with the Death Maw Valley of this giant sandworm that swims around. It's just a big lane. You could set up turrets to take down the oncoming enemies, or you may have these missions where you're on an alien spaceship, so there's nothing but alien tech for you to find, so lots of really fascinating weapons. Project Elite's frantic and satisfying gameplay is going to have you wanting to take on the alien horde as much as possible. So that is my number 46, Project Elite. My number 45 is going to the game Coloretto, a filler game where you are going to be trying to collect sets of chameleons. Now, these chameleons are all different colors, but here's the twist. At the end of the game, you are only going to score for your 3 largest sets. You'll score positive points based on how high you get up to, all the way up to a set of 6, but every set that's outside of those 3 biggest is going to be straight negative points, and they also scale based on how many you have. My favorite part of Coloretto are the turns, the main mechanism of how you actually collect these chameleons. On your turn, you're going to be drawing 1 card from the deck and placing it into a group of chameleons, or you take one of the existing groups of chameleons. These groups can have up to 3 at a time, so it's up to you whether you decide, hey, do I take a lot of chameleons and ensure that I'm getting cards, or do I take only a handful to ensure that I get the ones I want? There's a lot of pressure when it comes to making that decision of, do I take these chameleons or do I draw? And then once you decide to draw, there's even more pressure with where do I put this in order to benefit myself, but make sure that no one else takes it, because everyone else will get the first chance at taking that set of chameleons. This core choice is simple enough for anyone to understand, but deeply satisfying no matter who you are. With that being said, there are also a lot of mini micro expansions that you can use for this game, including bonus cards or limit changes, and these modify the way that you're actually going to score or play the game. Most of these mini expansions change a single rule to the base game, but since these rules are so critical to the makeup of the game, it affects the entire experience. This could be something like changing the number of scoring sets. Maybe it moves from 3 to 2. That is gigantic because all of a sudden everything is way more restrictive because you can only score your 2 biggest. Oh my gosh, talk about turning a game on its head. Or you could change the abilities of the wilds, or maybe +2s become -2s, so it becomes even more dangerous. There are so many fascinating things to do with these mini expansions, but that core experience is just so gratifying and so satisfying and so accessible that I think anyone can enjoy Coloretto, and it's become one of my go-to filler games in this past year. Incredible game. This is Coloretto, my number 45. My number 44 goes to War Chest, a 2-player or team versus team game where you control a set of 4 different types of units and are going to be fighting over control points on a shared map. The core mechanism of this game is bag building. At the start of the game, you're going to take some of the chips for each of your troops, put them in your bag, and then on your turn, draw a hand of 3 randomized chips from your potential pool. With those chips, you'll decide what to do with them, and all the chips are multi-use. You can summon them onto board as units. You can discard them to activate a unit of that same type. You can bolster a pre-existing unit to make it stronger with more health, or you can use them to recruit new chips into your bag. Each player is going to have 4 units that all have unique abilities and make for a varied gameplay experience. My favorite part about War Chest is the way it's taken a 2-player abstract head-to-head game and introduced uncertainty and risk into the actions through the use of imperfect information. That bag that you have, that content is known to the other player, but what you actually are drawing each turn, that's the risky and uncertain part. Every time you make a play, you have to predict and anticipate what your opponent will do and what you can personally get away with. You could make some really risky plays by sending things out to a potential danger zone, knowing that, hey, this could work or this couldn't work, and I think that makes for a very fascinating and exciting game. The multi-use chips also play into this because the more of a chip that you have on the board, the less that you have in your bag to be able to activate them, which makes them for more infrequently usable units. And I think this is really interesting because the stronger a unit is, the more it's been bolstered, realistically, the less you're actually going to be able to utilize said unit, which means that your opponents will potentially have more chances to activate their weaker units against your larger one. On top of all of that, each of these games is going to be drastically different based on the units that are drafted. Their interplay between one another and against each other is going to make for some very tense situations, as well as trying to anticipate and dodge specific abilities and effects. This variance is easily managed though, because only 4 units are going to appear on each player's team. Aside from all the innovation in the gameplay, it's also extremely satisfying to play. You have these giant bags, you're going to be digging in and pulling out these weighted chips, sliding them on the board, stacking them on top of each other, and then destroying and obliterating enemy units while making risky and satisfying plays with your own. I love War Chest, and it's the best in its genre of this imperfect information 2-player abstract game. That's War Chest, my number 44. My number 43 goes to Heaven and Ale, my number 59 last year. This is a tile placement game where you play as monks. You'll do your best to create beer, and you do this by gathering ingredients. At the end of the game, the ingredient you've collected the least of, you'll score points based on how far you got this monk character up this specific track. You'll multiply those values and then score that many points. But the core system itself is tile drafting, and that's through the use of this path mechanism. On your turn, you can move as far forward as you want, however, you can never go back. But the cool thing about this is the turn flow is clockwise, so it doesn't matter how far you go, you're still going to get your turn based on turn order, and I love that about this. While jumping ahead on the path is going to reduce your options, you are not losing any amount of turns, just options. And I love that about this system, where you can make a jump and not feel like you're missing out on a big portion of the game. In addition, the scoring is on the board itself, and they're also first come, first serve. And your tiles are not going to be doing much unless you activate that scoring, so it's really important that you do make some jumps at critical junctures so you can get some good scoring turns in as well. In addition to the way the path mechanism is implemented into this game, my other favorite part of it is the tile placement itself. When it's your time to place a tile, you have to decide to place it on the dark side or the light side of your board. Whatever the number on the tile is, that's how much money you pay. But if you play it on the dark side, you pay that cost. If you play it on the light side, it's double. Now the reason for this, if it's on the dark side, it's going to produce money and that's it. But if it's on the left side, the light side here, it's going to produce victory points in the form of these ingredients. And remember, you're trying to push up all of these different ingredients because that's how you score. That's pretty much it. That and some bonus objectives you're going for. But wow, this game's scoring is super tense and super tight. In addition to scoring the conventional way through those scoring tiles on the path, you also will be able to collect these shed tiles if you completely surround one of these areas. When you do, you'll add up the value of all these numbers and then get some sort of bonus that's going to trigger some of those tiles. I love this about this game because not only are you just trying to fill up spaces, but the numbers and numerical values are actually going to matter when trying to achieve specific shed types. A 0 to 7 shed will allow you to move your monk, which will increase your multiplier at the end of the game. However, maybe you need a lot of cash, so you need a lot of separate activations, so maybe you go for a very large amount of shed. And you're trying to miss out on this middle one here, this 12 to 17 because it's just not as efficient. So it's really interesting having to look for specific numbers through that path mechanism. I also really love the way that you're encouraged to score things early, because if you do score two things that are next to each other, you get to play a special ability card that's going to get you some amazing effect. There's so much tension and so much to love in this game. I love the tile placement, I love the race for objectives, and I love that you're continuously engaged, having to make tense decisions throughout. A gratifying tile placement game. That's heaven and ale, my number 43. My number 42 goes to Hanamikoji, a game where you try to win the favor of the geishas, and you'll do this by playing cards in a battle line style system. If you have more cards on your side than your opponent does at the end of each round, you win the favor of that geisha. You win the game when you have either 4 geishas favors or 11 value worth of geisha favor. Now, the game flow itself, though, and my favorite part about this game is how you actually get these cards in front of you, and that's through the use of these action tiles. Now, the action tiles are extremely straightforward, but you only have 4, and that's it. You get 4 turns during these bouts, and you're going to have to use each of these action tiles exactly once. The first action here allows you to select a card in your hand, put it face down, and then reveal it to your side of the row at the end of the round. This is really great because it can give you some big swings. The next one here allows you to get rid of 2 cards permanently from your hand, and nobody gets them. And then the last 2 are where it gets tricky, because these are I cut, you choose mechanisms, where you're going to be taking a pile. In this first one, you'll take 3 cards, you reveal them to your opponent gets one of them, and you get the other 2. Extremely strong, putting your opponent in that bind, and hopefully giving you the best outcome. The last card here is the trickiest, where you're going to be creating 2 piles of cards. Your opponent picks one of those piles and takes both of them for their side of the row. This is it. This is the core mechanism of the game here. You only are going to get to pick one of your cards for yourself, but the rest you give to the hands of your opponents. I love this system. I love how the information is not always perfect because of that one hidden card. I love how you are gaining this knowledge through discarding cards, and I love how you're giving your opponent the choice as to what they think will be the best for them. In addition, this dynamic of what items are valuable changes throughout the course of the game, because at the end of each round, if nobody has won, the position of the influence and the geishas themselves does not change. And all you have to do in order to prevent someone from taking your influence of the geisha is to have an equal number. So this increases the power level of certain cards for each player, which makes for a compelling experience that shifts and changes as you play. Hanamikoji's simple action system, yet deep gameplay, is going to keep this one in your mind from the moment you play that first card to that final reveal of the card you've kept hidden. My number 19 last year, Hanamikoji, is a winner. That's my number 42, Hanamikoji. And the last game on this list, number 41, goes to Hadrian's Wall, a flip and right game where you play as Roman generals. You'll do your best to defend Hadrian's Wall from the attacks of the oncoming Picts, and do your best to develop your Roman society at the same time. Now, the game flow is really straightforward. At the start of each round, you'll flip a card, and this card will determine all of the resources that you get from the round. In addition, you'll take some resources based on an objective card you pick, and then use those to climb up a variety of tracks. You have some tracks on your main board here that are going to increase your defenses and reduce the amount of damage you take from the incoming invaders, or you have all these citizen tracks here. These citizen tracks will give you bonuses, as well as give you buildings that you can construct in order to play a bunch of mini micro games, as well as accrue additional victory points, as well as create new resource production areas or more scoring opportunities. One of my favorite parts about this game is the objective system. At the start of each round, you'll get 2 objective cards. One you'll keep for its objective, and the other you'll get for its resources that are listed on the bottom left. This is going to set you down specific paths, which I find extremely fun, because it's going to change how you actually approach your game of Hadrian's Wall and vary up your gameplay from session to session. You also may be anticipating specific goals the more familiar you get with this game, and so you may have some sort of path that you're going through from the get-go. In addition, I love how gratifying this game is with the amount of resources you start each round with, as well as the amount of resources you're going to be getting through bonuses. Start of the round, you get a horde of resources. You can spend them on these different buildings, going up different tracks, and every time you cross off one of these white boxes with something inside, that gets you another resource that you can spend on something else. You're going to be climbing up these different tracks, prepping for the end of each round, and then when it's over, when you've spent the last drop, a new round begins, and you just get dumped on with all sorts of goodies. You could make some fun plays and turn resources into things you may need, but the big thing here is this game is so gratifying in how it showers you in bonuses and resources. An extremely satisfying game to play that is just so much fun with the different paths that you can take and the planning that you can make from turn one. I love Hadrian's Wall. From its multi-use cards to its aggressive invaders, Hadrian's Wall is a winner. That's my number 41, Hadrian's Wall. And that's the list. Those are my top 100 board games of all time, number 50 through 41, the 2022 edition. What did you think of the games that I talked about on this list? Do any of them show up on your top 100 board games of all time? What do you think about them? And that's the list. Those are my top 100 board games of all time, 50 through 41, 2022 edition. What did you think of the games I talked about here? Do you think any need to be further down the list? Any need to be off the list? Any that you absolutely love that are in your own top 10? I'd love to hear what you think and what you think of the games in general. Have you played any of these? Just talk about it. Let's hear some good stuff. But thank you so much for watching and thank you for being here. We are finished with that halfway point. Let's go ahead and keep on going. So that's everything. Thank you so much for watching SideGame Strong.